Morsi was, if I remember correctly, the first democratically elected president there. Talk us through a bit his rise and his fall, and what kind of legacy do you think he leaves?
Well, it's a complicated one. Morsi was the first freely elected president in Egypt, the first freely elected president really in the Arab world. And that's, I imagine, what he will be remembered for most. But before 2012, when he became the Muslim Brotherhood's candidate for president, most people had never heard of Mohammed Morsi. He was a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood, but he rose through the ranks really as a party man. And because of his close ties with the Brotherhood's leading strategist and financier, Kharat al-Shatr, who was the group's preferred choice by far for president. But when Kharat al-Shatr was disqualified from the race, Morsi was the backup candidate and found himself thrust into the limelight. During his year in office, he came under criticism from many quarters in Egyptian society for ruling in a divisive manner that alienated many people who voted for him outside of the Brotherhood. However, he was praised for working to help broker a ceasefire deal during Israel's war in Gaza after only about a week of fighting. But a few months into his rule, he made a fateful decision to issue a constitutional declaration that gave him temporary and far-reaching powers and placed his decisions beyond the reach of the courts. This then sparked widespread protests that grew into a mass June 30 mobilization against him that was actively backed and promoted by the army and the security establishment. On July 3rd, 2013, the military, then led by then General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, whom Morsi had trusted and appointed to be his defense minister, ousted Morsi from power. Since then, he's been detained, and for the past 6 years, he's been held in harsh conditions in solitary confinement. Rights groups say he's been denied adequate medical care. He's been prohibited from visiting his family or speaking with his lawyers, and he's been subject to trials that the rights groups say have been marred by significant due process violations. We don't have an official cause of death yet, but many critics point to this harsh imprisonment and medical negligence as being one of the reasons. So we'll have to see what happens going forward.
Indeed, a lot of people pointing to the harsh prison conditions in Egypt, his Muslim Brotherhood outraged, even calling it an assassination and calling for protest. But overall, in Egypt, you know, where is sentiment as to what happened?
Well, again, it's a complicated question. I mean, the Brotherhood itself has been largely crushed in Egypt. Most Brotherhood leaders are in jail or exile, and thousands of its rank and file are in prison. So they're not really they don't really have a voice on the ground in Egypt as they once did. The state and the media, which it largely controls, will try to minimize his death or even go as far as paint him as the leader of a terrorist organization, which they designated the Muslim Brotherhood at the end of 2013. I think if you speak to most rights activists and advocates, they would say that Morsi's death should shine a spotlight on the extremely harsh prison conditions that thousands of political detainees suffer in Egypt. And Morsi himself was effectively cut off from the outside world for the past 6 years. And even a panel led by British parliamentarians last year filed a report saying that his prison conditions and medical negligence could likely cause premature death, and they seem to have been proven right with his sudden death yesterday in court. So again, Morsi has a complicated history. It's hard to know what his effect his death will have on the ground in Egypt. But again, I think his legacy will most likely, he'll most likely be remembered for being the first freely elected president in Egypt. But I doubt that his death will have a large effect on either the Brotherhood itself, which has been largely forced into exile, or on the political reality in Egypt, which is one which is very harshly controlled by the regime of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi.
Okay, indeed, very interesting to get